Hi everyone, and welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. We've got a really special episode this week that is all about bloodsucking birds. There's a new exhibit that starts later this month at the Field Museum in Chicago that is about bloodsuckers of all types, from leeches to lamprey to what we like to talk about the most, birds. We wanted to release this episode to coincide with the exhibit and also to get everyone ready for the spooky Halloween season. As you know, our co-hosts John Bates and Shannon Hackett are curators of birds at the Field Museum. So join us this week as we learn all about vampire finches, oxpeckers, and look at the myth that flamingos feed their babies blood. Now, go get your binoculars, maybe some garlic, and let's get started. Well, should we talk about some bloodsuckers?
Yes.
Yeah, let's talk bloodsuckers.
Yeah.
It's getting to be that time of year.
Yeah.
So there's an exhibit going on at the Field Museum all about bloodsuckers of all types. Is that correct?
Yes, and I can't remember its opening date, which is bad. I should look that up. But it was developed by the Royal Ontario Museum, and it's a traveling exhibit, and it's coming here. And we're doing a lot of events associated with it for both donors and members of the museum community. It coincides pretty well with Halloween and the whole vampire kind of
it's spooky
stuff. It is.
Sure.
So we're having an event for business people next week that I'm playing a part in, and one of the opening remarks is, "We've warned you that this is going to be disgusting."
Oh,
right? So
like
prepare
that.
yourself.
We've been looking at YouTube videos of bloodsucking birds, and from the first 10 seconds we're like, but we couldn't stop watching too.
No,
It's
yeah.
And the
fascinating.
good news is there aren't very many birds that do it.
Yeah.
So are there two main ones then? Is it the vampire finch and the oxpecker? Those are the two that we kind of read the most about.
Yeah, there are other birds and blood, both legends having to do with plovers, and there's also a thought people have been afraid that flamingos feed blood to their young.
Whoa.
Because if you look at videos and images online, you see an adult bird and it's dripping a red solution into its baby's mouth, but that's crop milk, and it's red because of the pigments the carotenoids that are being eaten, same things that makes them pink, but that gets in the crop milk, and so it looks like they're feeding them blood, but that's not what's happening.
So flamingos, not vampires.
Not vampires.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But oxpeckers and vampire finch.
Yeah,
They
they do
are.
indeed drink blood.
So we watched a video on the vampire finch, and it was all about kind of the way that they would go to the blue-footed booby
Yes.
is kind of who they target mostly. And so we were trying to figure out, why is it the blue-footed booby? What's so special about that?
So we could talk about Galapagos finches for multiple episodes if we wanted to, but let's not do that.
But we should say that Galapagos finches aren't finches. They're actually tanagers. So that summer tanager you've been talking about, they're more, and other kinds of tanagers are more closely related, even though that's not a tanager anymore. But yeah, the bird tree of life is complicated. But the Darwin's finches are not finches. They're nested within tanagers.
So the story of vampire finch, though, is a really interesting one of local adaptation. In other words, these finches occur on two of the most isolated islands on the Galapagos, and the cover on the islands is pretty sparse, and most of these tanager Galapagos finches eat seeds, and sometimes seeds aren't readily available. And if you're a bird on an isolated island, you may look for other things. And it turns out that isolated islands are really good for breeding seabirds because they're not molested by, a lot of times it's rats that humans introduce, but other things. And so there are colonies of blue-footed boobies on these islands. And over time, the birds have realized that the boobies don't seem to want to leave their nests during incubation, and so
babies are like prime meal
Things
Yeah.
to eat. Yeah.
and so they can just hop up behind them, and just start plucking at the feathers, and the boobies don't seem to notice very much.
Oh my gosh.
So when the when the environment's really dry, it's not that easy to find water. And if there are some things you can do to hydrate yourself, but these birds have chosen to drink blood.
But and at the same time, I mean, this is something that they're doing, as Shannon's saying, it's kind of it's an opportunistic thing that turns out to supplement the diet that they have of seeds a lot of the rest of the year.
So it's only kind of when they get desperate, or do they?
I mean,
or is it part of their? Is it evolved
it's
to be part of their diet?
It's become a routine.
Oh, wow.
I think they probably started doing it, I would guess, out of desperation. But sometimes that's the best way to figure out that, hey, there's something good we should be doing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. It has caused changes to the bird's microbiome. So the bacteria that are in the stomach and intestines and mouth, it's caused a change in what they have, so that they can digest blood. So there's certain kinds of bacteria that are good with dealing with things that are in blood that help them digest the blood and get rid of these things. So turns out their microbiome is unlike their closest living relatives across the Galapagos, and more like a vampire bat.
Wow.
Again, to deal with metabolizing the blood that you've consumed. So you get the water out of the blood, but then you got to get rid of the other stuff. And so it changed their microbiomes to do that. That behavior has caused a change in their microbiomes, which is really pretty cool when you think about it.
So do they teach like they're young, like this is how you can, or is it instinctual at this point? Or
that's a great question, and I would say I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that. That would be an interesting thing to figure out.
I think you got to learn it pretty fast, because if it's a really dry year and, maybe you can suck a little bit of water out of a cactus that may be there, but you're going to die without liquid. Mm-hmm. So you figure it out pretty quickly. You get thirsty if you're a bird, you look around, you see other birds doing it. Yeah.
Wow.
There you go.
And do the boobies seem to mind? I feel like
they don't.
They don't.
No, that's one of the crazy things.
It's very weird. That's why those videos are so odd. And they preferentially choose babies, which makes baby boobies, which makes sense. And it's very visually stunning, because they're called blue-footed boobies for a reason, and their feet are bright blue, and the red of the blood sticks out on their legs. You can see the blood when you look at these videos or images of it. So it's pretty dramatic.
Wow. It looks pretty dramatic when we saw it.
Yeah. Birds have weird microbiomes, and it's not clear sometimes what even a core microbiome is for a bird. So birds have, and they can vary across seasons. Another thing the migratory birds are showing us is how over the annual cycle a bird's microbiome might change, but they don't change as far as going to what vampire finches have done, like co-opted whole new bacterial groups to handle the blood.
I was going to say, oxpeckers in another part of the world are doing this, and I don't know what we know about the microbiome of oxpeckers, but probably nothing.
Yeah, I bet it's nothing. And that's an interesting thing, because you've got to get rid of iron and you have to get rid of sodium. So that you're getting that when you're getting blood. And I don't know, and that's what these bacteria are especially evolved to take care of and metabolize for these birds. And I don't know what portion of their fluids do oxpeckers come from blood. Yeah. So you should tell people what oxpeckers are, because we've shifted away from Darwin's finches.
Well, I think they're a fascinating bird. So they're confined to Africa. There are two species, and they're based on genetic work. They're now put in their own family, although they're the sister group to the starlings. So like our European starling, and they're probably roughly thrush-sized birds with these bills that are evolved to literally sit around. Well, what they do is they hang around on large vertebrates, large mammals across sub-Saharan Africa, and they eat ticks and other things that are on the animals. And it's considered to be a mutualism, although that's debated a little bit. And they will go after blood, which is why they're going to be in the bloodsucker exhibit. It's a justifiable thing. But as we were just saying, I do think it would be fascinating to know. I mean, they almost have to have a microbiome. It
depends on what proportion of their water comes from blood.
Water, yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but those images are cute, right? The riding on the back of a
it seems like they're friends until it starts eating its wound.
Yeah.
So the oxpeckers, they're not actually like creating the wound like the finches are, right? They just are there, and if there happens to be something, then they start digging in.
Right.
That was something I kind of noticed, the difference between the two.
Yep, that's exactly right, and it is a important difference, and at some level it highlights just how bizarre the Galapagos can be in terms of
and how do you start doing that,
finches.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's two species of oxpecker. They both do this. Who started? Why did it start?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but those are kind of the things that keep me up at night, is to think about those things without an answer and if it's, why hasn't it evolved a whole bunch of times? Why is it just in them?
Yeah.
I think it's probably because it's a pretty narrow niche, but
but there are a lot of big mammals in the world.
It's true, there are, and they've been doing but the oxpeckers have been doing this for millions of years, and so their morphology is very different from the typical starling. The bill's different, even the body plan is kind of different to be able to perch on giraffes and kudu and things like that, and pick up.
And so they'll actually like roost on giraffes, right? Like that's just where they kind of spend their time, and they don't really, once they find a giraffe they like, that's kind of where they hang out.
If you do a lot of tick control, so for instance, they're on a lot of donkeys and things like that in West Africa. If there aren't ticks on the animal, there's nothing to eat, and so they're going to have to go someplace else. And so they are capable of, they fly catch and catch insects that are off of these animals, and yet at the same time, ticks are very prominent on a lot of large mammals.
Yeah.
And so
is it good to have the bird pluck off your ticks?
And my guess is a good animal you'd come back to time after time.
Right.
If it's got a lot of ticks.
Yeah.
So the second it gets a wound, though, and the oxpeckers start eating at the wound, is that like, does it just spiral downward? Like, does it?
I wonder about that. I wonder how much good data there are. People are clearly concerned about that, and I could imagine that there could be problems with that. But I could also imagine that this is enough of a mutualism that there's, I don't know, that there. I guess it's hard to imagine there could be any benefit of an oxpecker actually pecking at your wound. This is why we have this bloodsucker exhibit.
Yeah.
Get people out there researching this.
Yeah.
It's, from what we read, it sounded like the vampire finch initiates the blood draw, but it's just annoying. But the oxpecker could actually kill you, right? I mean, if you're an animal.
You mean by giving you an infection, or
no? It was like
they can't. That's a little bird, relatively speaking, compared to an elephant.
Is the animal unable to heal because it keeps getting pecked at?
That's what we read about.
I can imagine that say something like a donkey could probably, you could have trouble with that, and I can imagine that the bird isn't necessarily, as long as there are other hosts around, doesn't care and could just move on to the next host.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. We watched some kind of video, and again, this is just on YouTube, but it was they were saying an oxpecker, if it does find an open wound, other oxpeckers will come, and that's where you get in trouble. Was that your impression too?
Yeah, that's what we saw in some videos.
You certainly see them congregate, and I could imagine that could be a problem for an individual that's got an open wound. Yeah.
Did you guys look up anything on Egyptian plovers? Because that's another one that is in the blood-sucking realm, but I don't know that there are any actual data. There's legends and lores about them going into the mouths of crocodiles and pulling the leeches out of the mouths. Egyptian plovers are beautiful, so we've talked a little bit about plovers, but they're really beautiful birds. But so I knew about that. And John mentioned it when we were talking about bloodsuckers. But I don't know that there's any real video or photographic evidence. And I don't know exactly where that lore kind of comes from.
I think some of that is because these birds are kind of the southern edge of the Sahara. And so they're actually not seen a lot of times by bird watchers or researchers because you got to go to some pretty remote places to actually see them.
Oh.
So I also think of blood in a different way, and that we have large projects, and a lot of people do, large projects looking at blood parasites, so the things that are in blood. And so there's lots of ways you can think of blood sucking. You can think of the mosquitoes and the flies and things like that are biting a bird and exchanging things like malarial parasites, for example. Mm. And there's been a lot of work that's been done on malarial parasites. It's been devastating in Hawaii for the introduction of some lineages of malarial parasites, devastated the birds that are naive hosts. And so when these parasites get introduced, they have no immune defenses to it, and this is not good. So we're really interested in what lineages are, how many birds are infected at any given time, and how that might change through time. It's another thing that the birds that are in our collections from window kills are telling us about, because you can look at the liver tissues and things like that we've collected and see whether the birds have malarial parasites in them. And then we can look at lineages through time and prevalence through time.
Wow.
All of those could play a role in not just the basic knowledge of birds, but how you might preserve birds, how you might conserve.
Yeah. So how many bloodsuckers then do you have in your collection at the Field Museum?
I looked that up. Where is the data?
We do not have any vampire finches.
No, we don't.
No?
Unfortunately, we do have Darwin's finches.
One of the things I find fascinating about that is that whole syndrome is something that people have only really realized was going on in the last 30 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's really neat.
That's amazing. Jeez.
We were going to ask if you have to keep them in coffins or
a
ring of garlic.
Yeah, with steaks and
yeah. Well, the blood-sucking event or the exhibit sounds fascinating. So,
it's going to be a lot of fun. The timing's good.
Yeah.
Birds are a little bit depauperate in the blood-sucking area, but there are some pretty cool examples.
Well, we were excited to find out that there were any. So we were like, what? There's blood-sucking birds. So it's just been fun to chat about them.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, should we jump into one of our mailbag questions real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is from a listener, Ariana from Logan Square, Chicago. She said, I recently started listening to your podcast and love how informative it is. Have you all ever thought about doing an episode about pigeons and how much we misunderstand and mistreat them as neighbors?
We could absolutely do a section on pigeons because they're pretty amazing. And one of the biggest things is they're unbelievably successful. Mm-hmm. I mean, their native distribution is kind of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and yet they've adapted to all kinds of landscapes. One of my favorite things about pigeons is that they're an incredible example of artificial selection. And then, gosh, I just heard an amazing story about pigeon navigation that has me thinking about infrasound. And so I think we could absolutely talk about pigeons for a long time and should.
Okay.
Yeah, they highlight the weirdness of humans in making bizarre phenotypes of birds.
Okay.
Okay.
Second to parrots, because parrot people know no boundaries on what they'll cross. It seems like parrots know no boundaries on who they'll mate with. But
but as much as they bug people, I guarantee you that the people that have homing pigeons will tell you that the capacity that those birds have to navigate is just absolutely incredible. And so
their brains need to be studied in a comparative sense to understand what it is that enables them to be so good at what they do.
Oh wow, I'm excited.
So I'm all for it. Let's talk about pigeons. One of these days. Yeah.
So they're not as kind of icky as people think they are, right?
Yeah.
So, and you do just walk by them every day and don't think about them, but there's all kinds of really interesting things about pigeons. So
I'd love to just learn more because we see them so often. And this was kind of when we talked about the ring-billed gull, it kind of had an effect on Amanda and I where we kind of just thought, oh, they're everywhere, didn't pay much attention to them. And then the more you learn, the more you start paying attention. And I don't know, now we see them and we get really excited. And,
Yeah, mundane.
Even the most mundane birds are really interesting. Absolutely.
I mean, I love chickadees. I love my house sparrows. Introduced again, my friends, constant companions.
They don't suck blood, but
no, they don't.
At least not yet. So maybe they will.
I wish they would suck the blood of some squirrels and chipmunks in our yard. I wish they could take out bunnies too.
RJ, what's our wildlife photographer friend? What's his?
Dustin Wiedner. He's a follower of our social media and has been sending us pictures. So we've been posting them.
I was going to say his pictures of the ring-billed gull have really turned me on to how spectacular they are. When you see them like up close, it's like, wow.
That's why
so
I love
pretty.
bird specimens.
Yes.
You can hold them in your hand and you can look at the feathers and really get up close and personal.
I would encourage anybody to look at high-speed video of pigeons doing their flight maneuvers because they have incredible capacity to change direction and dip and do things. And so, pigeons get a bad rap.
And we can talk more broadly about the group that pigeons are into, which have some of the most spectacular colors of birds in the world. So
awesome. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop for today. John, do you want to close us out?
Yeah. Bloodsuckers, vampires. I mean, it's October. You should embrace it.
But don't drink blood.
No.
Well, depends on what your microbiome's like.
Yes. I don't think you should drink blood as a human. I don't think that's a good idea.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please help spread the word and also give us a follow on Instagram. We're still trying to get the word out there and would appreciate any publicity that we can get. We also want to thank Earhole Studios in Chicago for helping us record. If you have a question for John, Shannon, Amanda, and I, feel free to send it to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com or reach out to us on Instagram. Also, if you're in Chicago, please make sure to go visit the Bloodsuckers exhibit at the Field Museum, which opens in late October.